The afternoon sun was bright, making the windows of the dealership shine like mirrors. Inside, the air smelled of fresh polish and new leather. Expensive cars lined the showroom, their metal bodies glowing under the lights. Salesmen in sharp suits stood around, laughing and talking loudly. Just then, the front door opened slowly. An old black woman stepped inside. Her clothes were plain. Her shoes looked worn out. Her hands were rough, and her face had deep lines, showing years of hard work and hard life. She held a small, faded purse close to her side. The room fell quiet for a second. The salesman turned and looked at her. Some raised their eyebrows. Some smirked. Then, as if by secret agreement, they all turned away, pretending to be busy. One young salesman leaned toward his friend and whispered, loud enough for others to hear, "She can't even afford a tire, let alone a car." The others chuckled under their breath. The old woman didn't say anything. She didn't react. She simply walked further inside, her steps slow but steady. Her eyes moved carefully over each car. She seemed to be studying them, almost like she was trying to find something. A middle-aged salesman with slicked back hair crossed his arms and shook his head. "Why waste time on her?" he said under his breath. A few customers in the showroom glanced at the woman and then looked away quickly, almost embarrassed for her. Some even smiled awkwardly, thinking she was lost or confused. But the old woman looked calm. She walked up to a shiny black SUV and touched the door gently with her hand. She smiled a little, a soft, secret smile, like she knew something no one else did. Still, no salesman came to help her. They stayed in their corners, laughing quietly or checking their phones. To them, she was invisible, a waste of time, not a real customer. The dealership manager, a tall man with a loud voice and a fancy watch, saw her from his office. He frowned. He didn't want someone like her hanging around. It made the place look bad, he thought. He came out quickly, putting on a fake polite smile. "Ma'am, can I help you?" he said loudly, so that everyone could hear. The old woman looked up at him kindly. "I'm just looking, thank you," she said in a soft voice. The manager's smile froze. He looked at her clothes again. He glanced at her worn shoes. He made up his mind instantly. "Well, ma'am," he said, still loud, "these cars are very expensive. Maybe you would be more comfortable checking out the used car lot outside." A few more chuckles from the salesman floated across the room. One even muttered, "Or maybe the bus stop." The old woman smiled again. A calm, peaceful smile. She nodded politely and continued looking at the cars as if she hadn't heard the insults. The manager stood there, unsure what to do. Finally, he called over a security guard with a little wave of his hand. The guard, a heavy man with a big belt, came over quickly. "Ma'am," the guard said, a little too loud, "I'll show you to the exit." The old woman looked at the guard kindly, just like she had looked at the manager. No anger in her eyes. No fear either. She patted the side of one last car, a beautiful red sports car, and whispered something no one could hear. Then she turned toward the door. As she reached it, she paused. She turned around slowly and looked at the staff, the manager, the salesman, the security guard. Her voice was calm and soft, but it carried across the showroom like a song in the quiet. "You will remember me very soon," she said. Then she pushed open the glass door and walked out into the bright sunlight. Inside, the manager and the salesman burst out laughing. "Crazy old lady," one of them said. "Probably thinks she's gonna win the lottery." Another joked. They had no idea. They had no idea who they had just thrown out. And they had no idea how much their world was about to change. 20 years had passed since the day Eliza Carter retired. The town had changed a lot. New buildings stood where old shops once were. Children who once played on dusty streets now walked proudly into big universities. But in the middle of all the change, one thing stayed the same: Eliza's name. The small training center she had opened had now grown into a big academy. It was called the Carter Academy of Hope. Students from different cities, even different states, came to study there. On the walls of the academy hung pictures of Eliza, smiling, teaching, hugging young dreamers. Every student learned not just about business or cars. They learned about respect, kindness, and strength. Every morning, before classes started, the teachers said the same simple words. Kindness never dies. Words that had once come from Eliza's own heart. One bright morning, a young woman named Maya stood in front of the academy. She looked nervous but excited. Today was her first day as a new teacher. Maya had once been a lost teenager, homeless, afraid, feeling invisible. Until one day, a kind woman from the Carter Academy had found her, fed her, and taught her she was worth something. Maya touched the silver necklace she always wore. A tiny heart, engraved with the letters, E.C. Eliza Carter. Maya had never met Eliza. Eliza had passed away peacefully years before. But her story had saved Maya's life. Now, Maya was ready to pass that same gift to others. Inside the academy, the hallways buzzed with laughter. Colorful paintings filled the walls. Drawings made by students showing scenes of kindness. One showed a woman helping a lost child. One showed a man giving food to a hungry stranger. One showed a simple old woman handing a flower to a lonely boy. In the biggest hall stood a bronze statue of Eliza Carter. She wasn't wearing a crown. She wasn't holding gold. She was simply standing with open arms, welcoming anyone who needed hope. At the base of the statue, words were carved deeply into stone. Respect is free. Kindness is powerful. And love can change the world. Every student who walked past that statue touched it lightly, like taking a small piece of courage into their hearts. Maya entered her classroom. 30 young faces turned to look at her. Some curious, some shy, some tough-looking but secretly scared. She smiled warmly. "Good morning," she said, her voice gentle. "Welcome to the Carter Academy. Here, we don't just learn to fix engines. We don't just learn to sell cars. We learn to fix hearts." The students leaned forward, listening closely. You might think success is about big houses, fast cars, and fancy clothes, Maya said, shaking her head. But real success is simple. It's about making someone feel seen, making someone believe they matter. She paused, her heart full. That's the Eliza Carter way. Later that evening, when all the students had gone home, Maya sat alone in the classroom. She looked out the window at the setting sun. Birds flew across the golden sky. The town's lights began to sparkle, one by one. Maya thought of Eliza, a woman she had never touched, but who had touched her soul. "Thank you," Maya whispered into the quiet room. "I promise I'll carry your light forward." Somewhere deep in the night breeze, it felt like a soft voice whispered back, "And I will be with you, always." Meanwhile, across the town, the original dealership, now called Eliza Motors, still stood proudly. It was still the kindest place to buy a car. Customers still found handwritten thank you notes tucked into their cars. Workers still smiled genuinely, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. A huge banner hung across the entrance. In every deal, in every heart, we remember Eliza. Tourists often stopped just to take pictures, not because of the cars, but because of the story behind them. The story of a woman who wore simple clothes, walked into a shiny dealership, and changed a whole world with nothing but love. And so, the seed that Eliza Carter planted, a tiny seed of kindness, had grown into a mighty forest, a forest of respect, hope, dreams, and second chances. And long after her footprints had faded from the earth, her spirit danced in every smile, every kind gesture, every dream that dared to live again. Because kindness, when planted with love, never truly dies. It only grows, forever. The dealership was quiet after the firings. No more loud laughter, no more proud looks, just silence and nervous faces. The old woman stood near the manager's old desk, looking around carefully. The new beginning was here, but she knew change would not be easy. The few employees left, 2 salesmen, 1 young woman at the reception desk, and a few workers from the service area, gathered together. Their faces were full of fear. They wondered, what would happen to us now? Would she fire us too? Would she shut down the dealership? But the old woman didn't shout. She didn't threaten them. Instead, she did something no one expected. She smiled. "I believe in second chances," she said softly. The employees looked at each other, surprised. "You didn't treat me badly," she continued. "But you didn't defend me either. That means you need to learn. If you are willing to change, I will give you a chance." Tears came into the eyes of the young woman at the desk. She quickly nodded. "I'm ready, ma'am. I want to learn." The others nodded too, some even whispering, "Thank you," with heavy voices. The old woman nodded. "Good," she said, "because starting today, this dealership will be different. We will not judge customers by their clothes, or their cars, or their color. We will treat every single person with respect and kindness." She paused, letting her words sink deep into their hearts. "Every person who walks through that door," she said, pointing to the entrance, "will be treated like family. No more fake smiles. No more looking down on people. If you cannot do that, you are free to leave." No one moved. No one wanted to leave. The old woman smiled again. "Now," she said warmly, "let's get to work." The first customer of the new day was a man in dirty clothes, carrying a small backpack. He looked tired. He looked poor. Before, the employees would have ignored him. They would have laughed behind his back. But not today. Today, the young woman at the reception stood up straight and smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, sir. How can we help you today?" she asked. The man looked surprised, almost suspicious. He glanced around, expecting laughter or rude faces, but all he saw were honest smiles. He slowly explained he was just looking around. He didn't know if he could ever afford a car. The young woman smiled even wider. "That's okay. You are welcome here. Please take your time." The salesman came over and offered him coffee. One even showed him some cars, explaining prices without rushing or pressuring him. The old woman watched from a distance, her heart full of quiet pride. It was working. The dealership was changing, not just on paper, but in spirit. Days passed, and soon something strange started happening. More and more people came into the dealership, people who had once been afraid to even step inside, people who felt they didn't belong in fancy places. Word spread fast. "There's a dealership in town where everyone is treated like royalty," people said. "It doesn't matter how you look. They treat you like you're important." Business boomed. Cars that had been sitting unsold for months were now rolling out of the lot. People lined up to buy, to lease, to trade. Families, workers, teachers, janitors, everyone came. And the employees, they were different too. They smiled real smiles now. They enjoyed their work. They felt proud to be part of something good. One evening, as the sun was setting, the young receptionist came to the old woman's office. She held a bouquet of simple flowers. "For you, ma'am," she said softly. "Thank you for giving us a second chance." The old woman took the flowers, her hands gentle and shaking slightly. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You gave yourselves the second chance," she said with a soft voice. "All I did was open the door." They stood there for a moment, 2 women from 2 different worlds, connected by respect and kindness. Outside, another car drove off the lot, a happy family waving from the windows. The dealership that once laughed at a poor old woman was now built on her wisdom, her heart, and her strength. And it was stronger than ever before. For a long moment, no one moved. The old woman stood calmly in the center of the dealership. Her simple clothes, her small purse, everything about her looked the same. But now, Everyone looked at her differently. No longer as a poor, helpless old lady. Now they looked at her with wide eyes full of fear and confusion. The manager's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Finally, he found his voice. "This must be a mistake," he said quickly, laughing nervously. "Maybe you bought another property, not this dealership." The man in the black suit didn't even blink. "This dealership," he repeated firmly. "As of 1 hour ago, the papers were signed. Funds were transferred. She is now your boss." He pointed toward the old woman. Gasps filled the air. The salesmen shifted uncomfortably on their feet. The security guard took a small step backward, suddenly feeling very small. The customers, who had witnessed the humiliation earlier, now watched with wide, curious eyes. The manager tried to laugh again, but it came out dry and fake. He looked at the old woman and forced a smile. "Welcome, Mom. Welcome to your new business," he said loudly, pretending to be cheerful. "We are so honored to have you here." But the old woman didn't smile back. She simply stared at him, her eyes sharp and clear. "Are you?" she asked softly. The manager swallowed hard. The salesmen rushed over, one by one, fake smiles plastered on their faces. "We were just joking earlier, Mom," one said. "You know, dealership humor," said another. The old woman said nothing. She slowly walked across the showroom, past the shiny cars, past the salesman who had laughed at her, past the security guard who had pushed her toward the door. She stopped near the red sports car, the same one she had touched before leaving earlier that day. She turned around. Her voice was calm but powerful. "Today, I saw your true faces," she said. "You judged me because of my clothes, because of my skin, because I didn't look like your usual customers." No one dared to meet her eyes. She continued, her voice steady. "You treated me like I was invisible, like I was worthless. You laughed at me. You humiliated me." The manager opened his mouth to interrupt, but the man in the black suit gave him a hard look that made him fall silent. The old woman walked back toward the center of the room. "In business," she said, "how you treat people, no matter how they look, shows your real character." Her words cut through the air like a knife. Then she pulled out a piece of paper from her purse. "This," she said, "is my first decision as the new owner." The manager leaned forward eagerly, hoping she would just forgive and forget. The old woman unfolded the paper slowly. "Effective immediately," she read aloud. "The following employees are terminated from this dealership for misconduct and discrimination." She paused, and then she began reading the names. Robert Matthews, manager. Kyle Jones, salesman. Mark Stevens, salesman. Brian Carter, security guard. Each name hit the air like a hammer. The faces of the employees turned pale. Robert, the manager, stumbled forward. "Please, Mom, give us another chance. We were just joking," he begged. The old woman looked at him with sad eyes. "I gave you a chance today," she said simply. "You showed me who you really are." The old woman's soft words, "You will remember me very soon," still hung in the air. But inside the dealership, no one was taking her seriously. They laughed even harder after she left. "Did you see her shoes?" one salesman joked, holding his stomach from laughing. "She looked like she walked here from another city," another added. The manager chuckled and adjusted his expensive tie. "Some people just don't know their place," he said proudly, tapping his shiny watch. Customers in the showroom smiled uncomfortably. Some looked at the door where the old woman had disappeared, but no one said anything. No one stood up for her. They all acted like nothing had happened. The dealership returned to normal, or so they thought. But the air felt different. Something had shifted. Outside, the old woman stood near the sidewalk. She pulled out a small old phone from her bag. She dialed a number with slow, steady fingers. "It's time," she said softly into the phone. "Bring the papers and bring the team." She hung up and smiled quietly. Back inside, the manager was busy bragging to some customers. "Here at our dealership, we believe in quality," he said loudly. "We only serve serious buyers, people who appreciate real value." He said it with a proud look, glancing at his staff, who nodded eagerly. The other salesmen kept talking among themselves, sharing jokes about the old woman. "Maybe we should start charging people just to look," one laughed. "At least make some money from these time wasters." The others roared with laughter. The security guard, feeling proud, walked around the showroom with a little extra swagger, like he had done something heroic by escorting an old woman out. None of them noticed the black cars starting to gather across the street. Luxury cars. Big, expensive cars that looked like they belonged to millionaires or important business people. Inside, the jokes continued. "Did you hear what she said before leaving?" The young salesman laughed. "You will remember me soon." "Ha! I'll remember her when pigs fly." Everyone burst out laughing again. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. Minutes passed, but then something happened. A man in a black suit and sunglasses walked into the dealership. He looked serious. He carried a thick file under his arm. Behind him, two more men in suits entered. And then, slowly, calmly, the old woman stepped in. But this time, she wasn't alone. And she wasn't smiling kindly anymore. Her face was calm but strong, like someone who held great power. The dealership fell silent. The salesman stared, confused. The manager frowned, feeling a strange coldness in his chest. The man in the black suit walked up to the front desk. He spoke clearly. "We need to speak to the manager immediately. Official business." The receptionist stuttered. "Why, yes, sir," and quickly pointed toward the manager's office. The manager stood frozen. He tried to smile, but it came out wrong, like a mask slipping from his face. He walked toward the suited men, trying to look confident. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice a little shaky. The old woman stood a few steps behind them, watching quietly. The man in the suit opened the file. Inside were papers. Official papers. "This dealership has been purchased," the man said in a firm voice. "The new owner would like to meet with all the employees." The manager blinked. He didn't understand. "Purchased? That's impossible. This is a top dealership," he said loudly. The man simply turned and looked at the old woman. The old woman stepped forward. She looked the manager straight in the eyes. "I told you," she said softly, "you would remember me soon." A heavy silence fell across the room. The salesman stopped laughing. The security guard stood frozen. Even the customers stared in shock. No one spoke. No one could believe what they were seeing. The poor-looking, tired old woman they had kicked out just hours ago was now the owner of the dealership. The days turned into weeks. The dealership became the most talked-about place in town. People came not just to buy cars, but to feel welcome, to feel respected, to feel seen. The old woman was always there, not sitting in a big office with glass walls, but walking around quietly, smiling at customers, helping staff, and fixing small problems herself. Everyone admired her, but there was something about her that made people curious too. Who is she really? Where did she get the money to buy this big dealership? Why did she choose this place? The old woman never talked about herself. She only focused on the business, on kindness, and on building a new future. But one afternoon, after the last customer left, the young receptionist gathered her courage. She walked into the old woman's small office, holding 2 cups of tea. "Ma'am," she said shyly, "may I ask you something?" The old woman looked up with kind eyes. "Of course, dear," she said. The young woman hesitated. She didn't want to be rude. "I just wonder," she said slowly, "how did you, buy this place? It's so big and expensive." The room became very quiet. For a moment, the old woman said nothing. She just stared out the window, her face full of memories. Finally, she spoke. "It's a long story," she said softly. We have time. The young woman smiled, sitting down. The old woman took a deep breath. Many years ago, she began, I was married to a kind man, a mechanic. He loved fixing cars. We dreamed of opening our own garage someday. Her voice shook a little, but she kept going. But times were hard. We were poor. People didn't want a black man fixing their cars back then. They said terrible things. They threw stones at our little garage. They broke our windows. The young woman listened, her heart breaking. One night, the old woman continued, a group of men came. They burned our garage to the ground. My husband tried to stop them. They beat him so badly he never walked right again. Tears filled the young woman's eyes. I worked 3 jobs to survive, the old woman said. Cleaning houses, washing dishes, sewing clothes. I saved every penny, every single one. She smiled sadly. I promised my husband before he died that one day I would own a place where people were judged by their hearts, not their skin or their clothes. The young woman wiped her eyes. And you kept that promise, she whispered. The old woman nodded slowly. I spent 40 years saving money, she said. When I heard this dealership was going bankrupt, I knew it was my time. She looked around the small office. This place was once full of pride and hate. Now it's full of hope. The young woman was silent, feeling a deep respect she could not even describe. You are incredible, she said finally. The old woman laughed softly. No, dear, she said. I'm just someone who refused to let hatred win. They sat together quietly for a long time, sipping tea as the sun set outside. But the hidden truth didn't end there. One morning, a man in a gray suit walked into the dealership. He looked very serious. He carried a thick folder in his hand. The receptionist quickly called the old woman. She came out, smiling warmly. The man introduced himself. I'm from the National Business Council, he said. We heard about your dealership, the way you treat people, the way you turned this place around. The old woman looked surprised. We want to nominate you for the Businesswoman of the Year award, the man said. Gasps filled the room. The employees, customers, even people passing by, all stopped to listen. The old woman's eyes widened. Me, she asked, her voice full of disbelief. The man smiled. You, he said proudly. You are a shining light in a dark world. We need more people like you. The young woman at the reception started clapping first. Then the rest of the employees joined. Customers clapped too. Even strangers outside the glass doors clapped. The old woman stood there, her heart full of emotions she couldn't describe. She had walked into this place alone, laughed at, insulted, humiliated, and now she stood in the same place, honored, respected, and loved. The hidden truth was out. She was not just the owner of a dealership. She was the owner of a dream built with blood, tears, and unbreakable hope. And that dream, once invisible, now shined brighter than the sun itself. Weeks passed after the award night, but the magic of that evening stayed in everyone's hearts. People from all over the city started visiting the dealership, not just to buy cars, but to meet the woman whose kindness had changed everything. Eliza Carter, the once ignored old woman, became a symbol of hope. Schools invited her to speak to children. Other businesses wanted to learn from her. Young workers lined up, asking for jobs at her dealership, just to be part of her story. But Eliza stayed the same. Simple, humble, kind. She still greeted every customer personally. She still helped clean the floors when needed. She still gave small lessons of respect to anyone who would listen. One day, as Eliza was watering the little garden outside the dealership, a young boy from the neighborhood came running. "Mom, Mom," he shouted, waving a newspaper in his hand. Eliza smiled warmly. "What's all this excitement here?" she asked. The boy handed her the paper. On the front page, in big letters, it said, "Eliza Carter, The Woman Who Changed a City. Below it was a picture of her, standing proudly with her workers. Tears filled Eliza's eyes. "I didn't change a city," she whispered to herself. "I just showed it the kindness it forgot." The boy looked up at her, confused. "But you're a hero," he said. Eliza chuckled softly. "A hero is someone who helps others see the hero inside themselves," she said, patting the boy's head. As time went on, Eliza decided to do something even bigger. She used part of the dealership's profits to open a small training center, a place where young people, rich or poor, black or white, could learn about cars, business, and respect. "This is for everyone who was ever told they weren't good enough," she said during the opening. The center had simple walls and second-hand desks, but it was filled with laughter, dreams, and hope. Eliza personally taught some classes. She told the young students her own story of how she was laughed at, ignored, and pushed aside, but never gave up. "Never let someone else's judgment decide your future," she said. "You are bigger than their small hearts." The students listened with shining eyes. They learned not just about fixing cars, but about fixing hearts, fixing dreams, fixing broken pieces of life. One afternoon, while closing up the dealership, the young receptionist who had been with her since the beginning sat beside Eliza. "Ma'am," she said softly, "do you ever think about retiring? You've done so much already." Eliza looked out at the sunset. She thought for a long moment. "Maybe someday," she said gently. "But not yet." "Why not?" the young woman asked. Eliza smiled. "Because every day one more person walks through those doors, needing to be seen, needing to be believed in." She looked at the young woman kindly. "And until the world stops forgetting the forgotten, my work is not done." The young woman nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Years later, even as Eliza grew older and slower, her spirit remained strong. People still came to the dealership just to hear her wisdom. Former students, now successful business owners, visited often, bringing flowers, hugs, and stories. The dealership became known across the country, not as the richest, not as the fanciest, but as the kindest place to buy a car. Eliza's name became a symbol, not just for selling cars, but for selling hope, respect, and second chances. When Eliza finally decided to retire, the city threw a huge parade in her honor. Thousands of people lined the streets, waving signs that said, "Thank you, Eliza. Kindness wins. You changed our lives." Sitting in the front car of the parade, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, Eliza smiled through tears. She knew she had kept her promise, not just to her husband, but to every broken heart who had walked through the world feeling invisible. She had made them visible. She had made them feel loved. And that was a legacy that would live on forever. As the sun set behind her, painting the sky in colors of gold and fire, Eliza Carter closed her eyes and whispered one final time, "Kindness never dies." And somewhere deep in the hearts of everyone she touched, her story, her spirit, her love, kept shining brighter than ever. Forever. The day of the award ceremony finally arrived. The whole town buzzed with excitement. For the first time, the dealership closed early. All the workers wore their best clothes, simple but neat. They didn't want to miss the big night. The old woman stood in front of a small mirror in her modest home. She wore a simple blue dress and old black shoes. Her hair was neatly tied back. She smiled at herself in the mirror, but inside, she was nervous. "I am just a simple woman," she whispered. "What if I don't belong there?" But then she remembered her husband's words from long ago. "You belong wherever your heart is pure." She took a deep breath, picked up her small purse, and left for the ceremony. The award night was grand. Bright lights, red carpets, cameras flashing. Important people in fancy suits and shiny dresses filled the big hall. When the old woman walked in, some people turned to look. A few whispered. Some smiled warmly. She held her head high and kept walking. Her employees were already there, waiting for her. They clapped as soon as they saw her. "You look beautiful, Mom," the young receptionist said, her eyes sparkling. The old woman laughed shyly. "Thank you, dear," she said. Soon, the ceremony began. One by one, people were called to the stage to receive awards for best sales, best designs, best new business. The old woman listened politely, clapping for each winner. But deep down, her heart raced. Would they really call my name? Or would it be just another empty promise? Then the host stepped onto the stage. He held a golden envelope in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, "tonight we honor someone very special. Someone who reminds us that real success is not about money. It's about heart." The room fell silent. This woman turned a dying business into a home of hope. She faced hate, but answered with kindness. She taught us that greatness wears simple clothes. The host opened the envelope. "Please welcome Mrs. Eliza Carter." The hall exploded with applause. The old woman froze for a second. She looked around, unsure. The young receptionist gently touched her hand. "It's you, Ma'am," she whispered, smiling through tears. Slowly, Eliza Carter walked toward the stage. Each step felt heavy, full of memories, struggles, and silent victories. When she reached the stage, the host handed her a shining trophy. The lights reflected off it like tiny stars. Tears filled Eliza's eyes as she took the microphone. She looked at the crowd, hundreds of faces, young and old, rich and poor. She took a deep breath and spoke in a voice strong and clear. "I am honored," she said, "but I am not standing here alone." The room grew quiet, everyone leaning in to hear. "I stand here with my husband, who dreamed with me, with every customer who ever felt invisible, with every worker who changed their hearts, with every soul who believes respect costs nothing, but means everything." People wiped their eyes. Some stood up quietly, moved by her simple, honest words. "I was once treated like I didn't matter," Eliza said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I never forgot that true worth is inside, not outside." She smiled gently. "I hope my story reminds you. Never judge a person by what you see. Judge them by the kindness they show, and the kindness you show to them." The room erupted in a standing ovation. People clapped, whistled, cheered. Cameras flashed. Tears flowed freely. Eliza Carter stood on that big, fancy stage, not because she had the fanciest clothes, not because she had the richest car, but because she had the richest heart. After the ceremony, many people came to greet her. Strangers hugged her. Other businessmen asked for advice. Young girls said she was their hero. One little boy tugged at her dress. "Ma'am," he said shyly, "one day I want to be like you." She knelt down, smiling warmly. "Then always remember," she said softly, "kindness is the real power." The boy nodded seriously, like he was carrying a great secret. The night ended with laughter, hugs, and many promises to be better people. Eliza Carter drove home slowly, the trophy sitting beside her. She looked out at the stars above. Kyle, the young salesman who had laughed the loudest, dropped his head in shame. Mark, the slick salesman, mumbled an apology, but it was too late. Brian, the security guard, didn't even try to speak. He just stared at the floor. The old woman turned to the remaining staff, a few salesmen and workers who had not laughed or insulted her. "You stayed silent," she said, her voice soft, "but you also didn't help." Their heads bowed low. She nodded slowly. "I will give you a chance to prove yourself. But know this, things will be different now." The tension in the room was thick. The manager tried one last time. He knelt down in front of her, right there in the middle of the dealership. "Please, Mom, I have a family, a house. I need this job." The old woman looked down at him, her face full of a deep, quiet strength. "You should have thought about that," she said, "before you decided who was worth your respect." She turned away without another word. The man in the black suit handed him an official termination letter. One by one, the fired employees were escorted out of the dealership, just like they had tried to escort her out earlier. Only now, they were the ones humiliated. They were the ones laughed at by the onlookers. They were the ones feeling small and powerless. The old woman stood near the entrance, watching quietly. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with gold and pink. It was the perfect ending to the day. But for the dealership, it was just the beginning of a new rule. A rule of kindness, respect, and real character. And the woman who once stood invisible in their eyes was now the queen of their world.